In 1877, shortly after the Japanese, universal education was mandated, not literacy only, but education to through to middle school was mandated and was required by legislation. It's only countries like India, and maybe it's only India, that we don't realize that it's not a question of doing some favor to women. It's a question of stopping the prevention of nation building because people got left behind, got left out of the mainstream economy. The costs of not having everyone able to uh, participate in the economy simply means that the nation loses, not simply the individual. So we decided a long time ago, almost more than a decade ago, to introduce this program in which we basically try to make a very quick um, improvement in the ability of an adult to read, write, and do arithmetic. We take a purely, completely illiterate person, and within 56 days, we can teach them how to read, write, and do arithmetic. However, if we leave them at that point, we find that over time, there's a recidivism. There is a certain amount of loss of memory of what they've learned. And in order to keep that up, we introduced a reading club called Gyan Chopali, which is a supervised or facilitated reading club where they have access to all kinds of literature, books, readings, tablets, and so on, where they can actually not only maintain but improve their reading ability. The total amount of time taken is around 6 months between the course and the Gyan Chopali. And with that, we have a totally new person, a citizen who can improve their own lives, their children's lives, their family lives, contribute to the community. An enormous number of the graduates of our program, which is now basically made about a quarter of a million women literate, 2.5 lakh women. And these women, many of them have become members of the panchayats, in fact, sarpanches. They've become entrepreneurs. They are actually leading leaders of the community. I think we can demonstrate amazing impact, not just on the life of an individual, but on the life of the community and the nation from programs like this. For almost nothing, for a very small amount of money, we can actually create a whole new citizen and a contributor to nation building. So let me just say that it's not enough to just be able to read and write. We do have continuing programs that lead to helping them build their life skills, their livelihood, job prospects, and even become entrepreneurs. And indeed, that progression is what makes the Tara Akshar most important because it enables people to go on to the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Khosla. And you talked about entrepreneurship. You talked about how the whole community gets literate. If a woman gets literate, earlier we used to say that it takes a village to raise a child. Now it takes a woman to make the whole village literate. Because this is what this whole program is all about. That if you make a man literate, you make a man literate person. But if you educate a woman, she educates the whole family. The whole family educates the neighborhood, community, the village, the district, state, and the nation. So that's why it's all connected in that fashion. And you also talked about entrepreneurship, which is an idea who's catching on in India. But unfortunately, as we just showed you the figures about women's participation in workforce, it's woefully inadequate. And when we talk about entrepreneurship, we talk about businesses, and we talk about helping women. There's no better person than Anuaga, who's with us from Pune. Uh, Anuaga, can we have you on video? And can you take this idea further, that how entrepreneurship, women's participation in workforce impacts the economy, not only our nation, but also our community, our villages, and our rural India, as we call it. Anuava.
Thank you. And I may not restrict my talk to the areas you told me, but anyway, let me begin. We, the privileged, tend to look down on the poor and blame their poverty for lack of hard work or ascribe it to their karma. In India, being poor and a girl child is a double whammy. We discriminate against a girl child and women when research has consistently shown that an educated girl who becomes a mother is more likely to invest in her children's schooling, will impact family health, and have better chances of having nourished family members. Girls who complete school are more aware of risks of child marriage and maternal mortality. They opt for fewer children and are more likely to protect their kids from exploitative labor and trafficking. An educated and financially independent wife will be less vulnerable to put up with mental and physical abuse from a husband and her in-laws. Hence, literacy and financial self-reliance are vital for marginalized communities. With all these benefits of investing in a girl's child's education staring at us, why do we not invest in this cause, and why do we ignore this issue? Sorry, I cannot start my video. You have to do something about
That's all right. It's the potency of your thought that counts. And
Okay, thank you.
yeah, I'll just ask you one question.
Yeah, I'm still going on.
In what you said about the impact on the society, and which is absolutely, absolutely important, that how literacy can change the gender inequality which we face in India, and how the women are the worse off when we do not spread education enough. But education as a tool of entrepreneurship, of self-sufficiency, you touched on that also. Do you think that India can reach its potential when only 1 in 4 women are employed or are productive in terms of contributing to our great economy?
No, certainly not. If we leave out a large number of Indians out of development and out of being in the workforce, it's unfair and it's not good for the nation. But let me, sir, first finish my talk, please. I haven't anywhere finished it. With all these benefits of investing in a girl's child education staring at us, why do we not invest in this cause, and why do we ignore this issue? I don't know all the reasons, but today I'm presenting you with an opportunity to donate generously to Tara Akshar, an adult education program which has been started over a decade ago, enabling unlettered women to read and write and to do simple arithmetic with confidence and ease through a highly effective and affordable program using extremely innovative methods and digital technologies. The success of the program is further enhanced by delivering it at the doorsteps within the poor rural community at timings that fit into the daily routine of women. All this is possible within 57 days. Let me now share my experience of being closely connected with Akanksha for over 23 years and with Teach for India, TFI, for 11 years. That is, ever since it was started in India. Both these NGOs are providing high quality primary education to children from impoverished urban communities, not rural, urban. I believe education is the best lever to pull a child out of poverty and deprivation. And this would apply far more to a girl child. I would like to narrate two true and wonderful stories of transformation through Akanksha and TFI. Meet Seema. Seema lives in an overcrowded, filthy slum in Mumbai with her mother and two brothers. Thanks to attending an Akanksha school, she did very well in her studies while her brothers dropped out from municipal school. She went on to graduate and apply to Teach for India, which takes 7% of graduates who applied for the fellowship program. The fellows teach for 2 full years in municipal and low-income private schools and become India's leaders through the experience of achieving success in the most difficult classrooms. After her graduation, Seema joined as a teacher in an Akanksha school and rose to be the principal. Meet Priyanka. Priyanka is the only child to her parents. She comes from a poor family where the father is serving a life sentence for murder and her mother struggles to eke out a living. Priyanka, by her influence of Teach for India, made it to the United World College in Italy on full scholarship and is right now studying in one of the US universities, again on full scholarship. Education is a magic through which both these NGOs have created many Seemas and many Priyankas. What is surprising and wonderful is, though they come from the poorest of backgrounds, Seema did not go for a well-paid teaching position in a private school, and Priyanka does not want to pursue a corporate career and wants to join a social sector and make a difference in the lives of the poor. I hope through these two stories, all of you are convinced about educating a girl child and an adult women. I wish each of you would support Tara Akshara Plus Adult Education Program and help many women to become self-sufficient and come out of the cycle of poverty. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your opening statement and giving us a microcosm of the problem and solution. And there are millions of Seemas and Priyankas and Akanshas who are out there in this vast land of ours who actually are looking actively to participate in life. And that's why we are having this series of webinars with Development Alternative and in an attempt to get more partners with us, more people who can share this great movement of uh, getting India on the road to what we call about progress and fulfillment for all its citizens. Thank you very much. I'll be back with you because there are questions that people will be asking.
Sure.
We just been joined by Eric Falt of the UNESCO. Thank you very much for coming on board. And I know that you have lots to say because you worked in India's neighborhood and in communities which we are trying to reach and we are trying to change. But we also have Dr. Anita Rampal here, who's an educationist, and she has participated in many such UN level uh, programs on this. And one component which is here is the final goal. I'll ask you, what is the final goal here? To get women capable enough to participate in productive life or it's toss up between ants and needs. That should we change the education system? Should we change the approach towards it? And how do we achieve it?
Yes, it's in a way, it's very interesting to be talking about this because in the 90s, we've had a very vibrant and robust literacy program. And we saw, or many of us, millions of us were involved in that. And we saw how people, and in fact, 80% of the learners at that time were women. I just want to say that we need to move beyond even looking at literacy for women in an instrumental way. By that, I mean that, often we say that if women get educated, then the nation would get educated, or the population rate would fall, or the family would be better. I think we need to move out of this. We can't place the burden of adult literacy on this woman. We need to look at what is her agency, what is her need for empowerment, in what way does that going to change her life. And I think that has been a problem because even earlier when we were working in this adult education, the traditional materials were very patronizing. In fact, all for men and women. And, they looked at it as angutha chhap, you can just about imprint your thumb. And even the materials, the teaching materials were really like top down, as if
you should be able to read a postcard. That was the
you can write your name, and as if you can't read and write, as if you know nothing else. So I think acknowledging that these are adults who know probably much more than many of us. I mean, these women would know about agriculture, would know about farming, or know about horticulture much more than you and I. Health. And so recognizing that, if we are talking of sustainable development, and I hope Eric will remind us of the SDGs, and UNESCO will remind us of goal 4.7, which is really what, I mean, at that time we were working with Education for All, which for us was quite enabling. It spoke of education for all, for a child, youth, and adult, and to bring these together. Unfortunately, in the 90s and early 2000s, we did it, but then we forgot about it. So today, the National Education Policy talks about very functional literacy is demeaning. Functional literacy, life skills, healthcare, family. I mean, why should I look at a woman and think of her only as a mother? Why? So I think we have to unlock her potential, as you said. Let's not say padhegi wo aur badhenge hum. Let's not put all our aims before on her poor shoulders, but first think of what it means.
No, hum is the nation.
I know, but the nation should first recognize that she is the one who needs to be unburdened. She is the one who needs to be liberated. And education, what does it mean to her? So this is what, in fact, the aims of the National Literacy Mission were, that you read and write your world. It was like Paulo Freire had said, to be able, and it said that she should be able to understand the reasons of her disenfranchisement, her subjugation.
But there are the details, and
but I'm saying that is how you plan.
Even a literate woman's participation in even democracy is much more.
Absolutely.
I mean,
so that's what I'm saying. If she understands what are the forces which are keeping her out, keeping her down, in what way, that's when she really understands her agency. And that's what we saw. From the literacy program, so many of them stood for panchayat elections. And they said, Mukhiya hum banbe. We made a film on them saying, Mukhiya hum banbe. So I'm saying, let's not look at it in a very narrow, functional, these words are very demeaning, functional, they're very reductionist. You don't want her only to be adding 2 numbers or reading 2 lines.
No, but this program is for them to participate in local communities, to become, as you say, community leaders.
Absolutely.
And get more people involved. And
critical pedagogy is that. Critical pedagogy is to understand justice and to understand how education can allow you to be a transformation, give you transformative agency to change the same things which have held you back. So that is what we did for 10, 15 years. We have seen that.
Right to education, what you're talking about, right to education, you're part of the campaign there. Do you think that right to education, which could reach women from 60% to 80% in primary level, Do you think that's receding or reversing that trend?
Yes, unfortunately, the policy is now giving up on the right to education. It is saying that you can give children open schooling, you can give them a community volunteer, you can give them any kind of single teacher school. You know, this is not what, in fact, I just want to point out that it's almost a discourse of learning outcomes, which is damaging this whole sort of ambience of looking at education as empowering. Why? Because it says forget about inputs. Only look at outcomes which are tested through standardized tests. That is not what adult literacy can be, nor can it be in school. It has to be beyond that. And in fact, transformative education was that. So you don't give, even in the post-literacy phase, you don't give materials on chutney kaise bana loge, ya ye kaise kar loge. You literally, as part of the teaching process, we have seen women learn cycling. There was a whole district when women were learning cycling. And then I've seen it in Bihar, in Dumka, I've seen it in Pudukottai. Hundreds of women, thousands of women, even age 60, they learn cycling. Why? Because it changes, it engenders in you a different feeling about yourself, a different self-image. And it's collective. So there's the 60-year-old woman who used to say, if I fall alone, the whole village laughs at me. But we are hundreds of us, we don't mind falling and getting up again. So learning how to drive a tractor in the middle of a program, which was a literacy program.
Those are life skills, by the way.
Yeah, but I'm saying
they're real life skills.
Yeah, but life skills not sort of put into little slots and silos of functionalities. They are into your own, moving out of your own self-image and mobility. What does it mean to you? All these things. So they were running self-help groups, but they were taking decisions, not someone else coming and running it for them. So they were doing Kala Jatha. They were coming and speaking in public.
That's real power, and that's the empowerment we
Come
are
and speak in public.
We are talking about. You talked about cycles, women learning to cycle. At one point of time in India, the sight of a girl in a uniform going to school on a cycle was empowerment. It added two things: mobility and education. That's the main thing, and that's changed the face of India in 90s. What Dr. Rampal was talking about.
I spoke about, which I think UNESCO, Eric should talk more, is SDG goal 4.7.
I'm just going to.
Which talks about a humanistic perspective, a human rights, a sustainable development, equality. Education doesn't address these things normally unless you consciously.
So that have to be embedded in our curriculums and our teaching materials, which is a must. Eric, we come finally to you because you have an overview of this problem and its solution and how it can be achieved. I mean, organizations like DA and Tarak, programs like Tarakshar have done a lot, and in India and in other countries. What has been your experience? And what do you think is actually at stake when we teach women, and I would not say literate, and empower them with education?
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. And I'm sure I will not give you a solution to this issue. I can only give perhaps a few pointers from a global perspective. And of course, mention some of the consensus around this issue. But I really want to start simply by thanking my friend of many years, Ashok Khoshla, chairperson of Development Alternatives, for inviting me to this first webinar on the theme of unlocking her potential. Development Alternatives does wonderful work. I'm a big fan, and I think it's quite good to have, in addition to the field work, also some reflection. And this knowledge series, I'm sure, will collectively help us to reflect and discuss on some contemporary issues, particularly as they relate to women in situations of vulnerability or marginalization. So maybe I could simply start by saying again that education is indeed an essential pillar to achieve our common objectives for the world we want in 2030, which is, of course, as has already been mentioned, the objective for the Sustainable Development Goals. Looking at the recent data by our UNESCO Institute of Statistics, we see that around the world, there's still 617 million young people who have not mastered basic literacy and numeracy skills, and even though many of them are in school. We see also that there's 773 million illiterate adults altogether who are at risk of being left behind. Therefore, the contemporary and unprecedented challenges of our times really call on us to redouble our efforts for these 1.4 billion people, many of whom are women. And there's no question that in this case, they deserve more attention because they're particularly in rural areas, but not exclusively, they are more at risk. It's all the more necessary because there is an educational crisis that has been caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, and which has jeopardized the progress made in recent decades. So at a time when we need to reinvent a world of hope and optimism, we see quite clearly that literacy is more vital than ever. And literacy, as we know, constitutes an indivisible element of women's empowerment, especially again for women belonging to marginalized communities where they continue to face multiple barriers because of their gender, obviously, but also its intersections with other factors such as age, poverty, and disability. So it's really important more than ever to realize and emphasize that literacy is essential to girls' and women's lives as both a right and a skill, being intrinsically linked to livelihoods, the lack of which results in the denial of rights and opportunities for women. This brings us to India. And indeed, when compared with the rest of the world, the female literacy rate in India remains low, standing at about 70%, which is almost 20% below the global average. Nevertheless, we also see a wide gender disparity in the country's performance on literacy, which leaves women with fewer opportunities to find employment and to actively engage as part of civil society. That's why it's so important to ensure the strengthening of women's education through more adult learning interventions that will facilitate their full participation in the nation's development. And that's why the activities of organizations like Development Alternatives are so important. They truly make a very big difference, in addition to what the government itself does. And I propose to go back to that point in just a second. For UNESCO, we have certainly always been very keen to promote and put strong emphasis on gender equality in and through education, especially because we view girls' and women's education as the most powerful accelerator for human, social, and economic development. We've demonstrated that if you empower and educate a woman, wherever she may be, this has a positive effect on society at large, especially in rural areas. Ensuring inclusive and equitable education for all is at the heart of our mandate, as reflected, yes, in the Education 2030 Framework for Action for the implementation, particularly of Sustainable Development Goal 4 on education and the complementary goals focusing on gender equality. We've made a lot of efforts to bring adult learning and education to the forefront. We don't bring solutions, I'm afraid to say, but we bring countries together to agree on specific situations. And I'm pleased to share, perhaps to limit my intervention today, two landmark developments that have played an integral role in this context. The first is what we call the International Conference on Adult Education, CONFITEA, which has taken place only every 12 to 13 years since the late 1940s. This is not one of the conferences that is necessarily the best known, but it does bring together regularly representatives of the international community focusing on adult learning and on education. And of direct interest to you, I want to mention that Confitea 7 will take place in Morocco in 2022. It's only a year away. It will be the first Confitea conference since the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals. And clearly the most significant event for the international community, focusing specifically on this issue in the lead up to 2030. I also want to report and mention another development which we are working on, which is the global report on adult learning and on education. That's a report that is produced every 3 years and aims to provide a clear and comprehensive picture of the state of adult learning and education around the world. The most recent report chose participation, equity, and inclusion in continuing education as its theme. And the next report, again, will be launched at the conference in Morocco next year that I've just mentioned.
Thank you.
I just want to finish by making one point, which is to acknowledge the initiatives taken by the Ministry of Education of the Government of India in terms of promoting adult education and lifelong learning. And it's important to acknowledge here the new national education policy, which establishes as an objective the attainment of 100% literacy by 2025. It is very much aligned with SDG 4, again, which advocates for equitable education for all. And it will also bring very positive steps towards prioritizing women's education. There's a lot of very positive direction as part of the NEP. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for giving it the global perspective and also a perspective for the point of view of the SDGs. Most of the SDGs will not be possible without education. We talk about equality, we talk about gender gap, we talk about climate change, whatever you can keep talking about, unless you have education, basic component. We've got lots of questions coming in now. So now it's the question round. For Dr. Khosla, Parul is asking, what have been top roadblocks in implementation of your program, and what have you learned from it?
Well, it's very much tied up with basically the whole issue of why literacy for women. There is no organization more sensitive to and dedicated towards the idea that women have a right to choose. They may not want to be literate. If they do want to be literate, then they should be able to acquire that skill on their own terms. There's no question about all that. But if we are going to set up programs to enable them to do that, these programs need support. They need the policy support, they need financial support, they need institutional support. And it's those people that we need to give arguments to provide that support that unfortunately muddies the water. Unfortunately, it's the economists and the political leaders who are not convinced by the first argument, which is the real argument. They need to know what it costs not to have everyone educated. What is the return on investment on education? And I'm sorry, I hate to have to do this, and I would much prefer a world in which you didn't have to use these arguments. But unfortunately, those are the only ones that seem to work in order to provide the support. You're absolutely right. There's no question in my mind that this should not be made into an argument of practicality or as you call it, functionality. It's a question basically of whether an individual human being has a right to decide how they want to live. And that I agree entirely with. But in order to raise support of the kind that we need in order to get to the other 150 million people who got left behind, we need to figure out ways in which to convince people who have the ability to provide that support. So that is a compromise that I wish we didn't have to make.
Yeah.
And perhaps there will be a day when we won't.
There's a Hindi saying, I'll just break out in Hindi for a minute, that bhuke bhajan na hot gopala. If your stomach is empty, then you can't talk about lofty ideas. So that's what it is, that the basic thing, and we looked at the chart in the beginning on how all the countries where female participation, labor rate participation is high, have a better record of sustainability, have a better record of human rights, have a better record of basic human values. There's a question for Anu Aga. Do you think industries, corporates have forgotten the cause of women literacy and education and focus is only on young generation? Yeah. Anu Aga.
Sorry, what's the question?
The question is, do you think industry and corporates have forgotten the cause of adult women literacy and now they focus only on young generation?
Corporates do not take up education directly. They help NGOs who do it, and some might do it for children, some might do it for adults. I don't consider educating children or women as the primary responsibility of a corporate.
Right, but a lot of contribution has been made by corporates in the CSR and on their own volition in this particular area, and they should be involved in it. When the government now is saying that private industry should participate more in nation building, so it's a good point.
Yeah, and of all the CSR donations, education gets the most.
Yes, that's correct. Absolutely.
So corporates are interested in helping NGOs, but not directly take it upon themselves as their responsibility.
And that's where the work of organizations like DA comes into focus and work. One more question, and I'll direct it to you. Why don't we see education of women just from individual perspective without involving role of mother in it? Why she is not given agency to access all her rights as a person?
In fact, that's exactly what I was saying, that we have to think of a young woman not in the role of a wife or a mother or whatever, and that's important, because then she realizes she certainly wants to get empowered, but she also then realizes how she has to deal with change and how she is a major actor. So it's for her that she's doing it. She's not just doing it on behalf of her children to come.
Yes,
I think that's the crucial, that's what I was saying. Let's not make it instrumental. Let's make it much more transformative for her, for the learner. And then the learner, of course, comes in and does many more things that you never expected.
Yeah, that completes the circle.
Yeah, she knows what her role is. She just wants to know
Yeah.
how to come into it and how should she enable herself to make that change.
Good. There's a question for you, Eric, from Akansha. Do you think Western world, and she written developed countries, adult literacy still deserves attention?
Yes, of course, it deserves attention in every society. There are people to this day in any country around the world which are not literate. So it's not just something of concern to India. It's perhaps more of concern to India because of the situation as we know it. But there's a whole body of research and knowledge everywhere around the world on this issue.
Great. Another question for you, Dr. Khosla. How do you envision bringing innovation in the program? Yes, absolutely. We didn't touch it much. Only we talked about the penetration of the smartphones in India and how we are woefully short of that. How do you envision bringing innovation in the program if given chance to redesign?
Thank you. I ran out of my 7 minutes, and that's why I couldn't cover this. But what is most characteristic of Tara Akshar is the use of absolutely cutting-edge tools, not just hardware and software in the digital sense, but of learning methodology, of heuristics, of how people learn. It uses an amazing technology called memory hooks, and it uses about 9 memory hooks, which are ways in which people memorize things in a way that is very easy and long-term. In fact, if there is a miracle aspect to Tara Akshar, it is because of these innovations. The other part of it is that teachers are scarce. It's a very scarce commodity, good teachers. And what we did with Taraksha was to eliminate the need for a sophisticated teacher. We need a facilitator. We need a moderator, a person who's in charge of a classroom and is able to make sure that progress is being made, but doesn't necessarily have to be a sophisticated master's degree teacher. In fact, anyone with a 12th pass can be a facilitator. So innovation in terms of how you design your learning methods, how you deliver them, and how you use modern technology to reach them. And in the case of skills rather than education and attitudes and behavior change, in terms of skills, digital technology is terrific. It can reach the millions, where the other way, you can only reach the hundreds. So innovation is extremely important.
Yes, and innovation at these times is very important because now we have a service delivery through connectivity and through smartphones, and that you have open us to redesign thing. There's a question here. Don't you for you, Dr. Rampal, don't you think it is important to bring an attitude in a change among men of our society for literacy to rectify its to reach its full potential for women?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's what we're saying, that in what way is this transformative, even if we're dealing only with women? And how do we engage the whole community, including men, to understand these processes? And that's what I'm saying, respect for her knowledge. We can't look down, that she doesn't know anything, but respect also for their ability to take on newer things. Because now we know that it's not just teaching, not just one by one teacher standing there and teaching. What is the process of adults learning? How do they learn? How do they make sense through tasks when they do things? And apprenticeship also, especially when we talk about artisanal knowledge or other skills which they are working into, link that with education. That is very important. Not de-link it, not decontextualize what you're teaching, but link it with processes of other knowledge systems that they are engaged in or they can engage in.
Enabling. Basically.
Yes, absolutely.
Enabler, not top down.
Yes, and apprenticeship is that. Apprenticeship is that. You learn from someone who knows more than you, but you participate in the process.
There's a question for Dr. Khosla, but I'll put it to Eric Folt first. How has this problem has been impacted by COVID?
Well, obviously, during the COVID period, there have been more difficulties in terms of the whole education systems. And it has made literacy probably a bit of a distant dream for many of the women that we are talking about today. So more than ever, we need to adopt appropriate strategies to ensure women's participation. It starts with adequate provisions in the law, and that's why I emphasized the national education policy earlier. It continues with what Ashok was mentioning earlier, which is that all learners should have access to ICTs through the integration of suitable infrastructure, and that was definitely a challenge during COVID-19 while it was still going through this period. I also think that more than ever, we need to think about livelihoods, because livelihoods were threatened by COVID-19, especially the younger men and women. But we see that we should focus more than ever on vocational skills development, which can lead to local employment opportunities. We've seen a number of studies already on how COVID-19 has impacted this situation, and I'm sure there will be a lot more in the future.
And how, Dr. Khosla, the program is adapting to COVID?
Well, I just want to reinforce what Eric just said. It has been impacted by the fact that it's a field program, and there was a lot of limitations on how it delivered. But the women in Tara Akshar went into action immediately. They were wonderful. They started learning how to make masks. They started how to generate new kinds of job interests, as well as making available their knowledge, their newfound knowledge, to the local community and able to help the local governments. We had tremendous response from them because I think to some extent the confidence that they gained from being able to acquire these new skills meant that they could acquire more skills. And so that essentially has been quite rewarding and very, very stark.
Great to hear that. And your own internal study during this time
Yes.
so really eye-opening thing that highlights
Absolutely. And it's been written up in newspapers, had a lot of media attention, in fact, and attention from local governments, from district magistrates and so on. So it's been quite rewarding.
Great. A question for Anu Aga ji. Anu Aga, how post-COVID, when corporates, when private sector has been hurting, do you think that there's more need now for them to concentrate and to help reach out and help in such causes and in such programs?
I'm a firm believer that CSR money plus individuals in the organization, especially the owners, through philanthropy, should reach out to many, many social problems with COVID, without COVID, but certainly reach out. I'm a firm believer.
Thank you. And your next question is also about that, that are there any efforts being made to reach out to urban non-literate women, domestic helps, entrepreneurs, small businesses, and there are many threats. This is a long discussion, and that's why we've kept it as a part of series of 6. Next 5 series we will be taking up soon, and I must thank all of you, Anu Aga, Eric Polt, Dr. Rampal, Dr. Khosla, for joining in today. But we are going to be continuing this dialogue. So the next parts in the series are livelihood. We are going to take it as a subject specifically. Financial access, another subject. Health, digital connect, and social empowerment. So these are our next subjects for this discussion with Development Alternative and Tara Akshar. And this will be on each Monday at 4:30 p.m. like today. And we really hope you join us, all of you, because this is an issue which may change the face and fate of India's hinterland. Thank you very much all for watching, and please join us in this endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.